Hello, players whose characters are just a little bit too much like them.
And DMs, whose villains are just a little too much like them.
Welcome back to Table Talk. I'm Maddie.
And I'm Robert.
What are we talking about today, Robert?
We are going to talk about villains, how to make them, how to roleplay them, how to use them in your world. The common term for them in D&D is BBEG. Do you know what that stands for?
Big bad evil guy.
There we go. I've never understood what the acronym meant, but
I don't actually know if that's true. That's just what my brain supplied me with.
I mean, that was pretty quick.
That's what I think it is. I'm gonna
like
double check that.
I mean, that makes sense. But yeah, BBEGs sort of not even historically. I mean, you just talk about sort of character archetypes throughout stories throughout history. She was right. She's celebrating.
Yeah.
Or I mean, like it's always just like the villain archetype or like the antagonist. I mean, there's really infinite number of words for it, but something about like the ones in D&D, I feel like they always have to be kind of like grandiose and have a very large personality and really drive a lot of the behind the scenes plot line. Like, you know,
because it's the fun, and it's one of the things of like in my mind, because the DM doesn't get like a specific player. I think that there's a lot more work poured into the villains. Stop showing me. Those are so bad.
Showing her pictures of me in high school, I fluctuated between super, super edgy and like little tiny itty bitty boy. So
that's just the side plot. That's the like B plot of this episode. Maybe we'll upload photos of Robert in high school.
Please don't.
To the server.
It's bad. It's bad.
But I feel like because the DM doesn't get like a specific character to play, I feel like there's more work poured into the villains, and I think that's part of the reason why the villain or like the BBEG or whatever is like always so grandiose or something, because it also gives like the DM a character to play with.
It's the one opportunity that we have to really make a character or something close to a character and then like play them.
Yeah.
I mean, you can do that with NPCs. I mean, pretty much every NPC you create, you will end up playing with, but few are as fleshed out as like the villain.
Yeah,
just because it's fun to play with them. For me, it's super fun to have NPCs that aren't just plot devices. Like I treat my villains very much like I would treat a player, in that I make them very organic. I make them do things behind the scenes. I have them make their own roles, take their own actions when the players are like sort of acting and interacting. I like to make mine feel very much alive, as opposed to just like an NPC that's there to move the plot forward or there to cause the party trauma.
Or it's just very like press X for dialogue.
Yeah. Or like fill them with a shit ton of monologues. I very much take, not inspiration from, but Brennan Lee Mulligan's, what was the guy's name in...
You gotta give me the season.
Oh, Jesus Christ. How
if you give me the season, I've got it. Unsleeping City, Robert Moses.
Yes, Robert Moses. I fucking loved that villain. I love that villain so much.
Oh, he was so good.
Try to make a lot of my villains very similar too. I don't think I've ever like taken inspiration from that character in particular, but just like if you guys have ever seen anybody listening has ever seen Dimension 20, specifically Fantasy High, or not Fantasy High. Holy shit, Unsleeping City.
Unsleeping City, my favorite season.
Is phenomenal, and the villain Robert Moses is like very much one of those in and out throughout the majority of the campaign, and is really only like in the spotlight for the last fourth of it.
Yeah.
But like is actively popping up from the very beginning and making decisions that are felt by the player and the world sort of as a whole throughout the entire campaign. And it's one of those things when you get to the end where it's like, holy shit, that was all him.
Yeah.
He's been doing all of these decisions. He did this, he did that.
And I think that's one of the like most fun things that you can do with a BBEG, or at least from the player's perspective. Those my favorite villains are the ones that you interact with throughout the campaign. And I'm not even talking about like combat specifically, because like I think that there's definitely a thing of like fighting your villain too early, and we kind of like touched on that in like personal conversations that we've had about D&D, outside of the recording room. Of kind of like biting off more than you can chew sometimes. But I think that there's something really fun about like having interactions with a villain and like as your party before like the actual combat, of being like, okay, we're going to have a conversation. It's going to be a tense conversation, but
it's like a little bit of pre-combat monologue where it's like, I've been tracking you for this many days and I've been doing this, or it's like, there's always like an offer you can't refuse type thing that usually happens where it's like, this is your one chance to walk away, or like, join me and fulfill my evil plans, or like, you, one specific character who I've been helping behind the scenes. come with me and betray the party. I mean, it never fucking happens.
No, it won't.
The one thing that almost consistently happens at the table is that no matter how evil of a character somebody's supposed to be playing, when it comes time to make a decision with or against the party, it's almost always with, even if the character is supposed to be not a with.
Even if it goes against the entire party's
it's just like,
ideals and morals.
Once you get to that point in the campaign as a player, you're like, even if I'm supposed to be this way as a character, like, fuck that.
And it's a hard thing to like try to balance when you want to play like a character, because I think like double agents can be fun, and I think that's something that can be explored at the table. I think that it's something.
I've tried it twice, almost 3 times actually, and 0 times has it worked out.
Yeah, every single time it has been.
The party has just been that infectious to the point where it's just like, okay, never mind. There goes that slide pod. Whoop.
But I think that double agents can be really fun. I think it's something you definitely have to have conversations about, because it's one of those things where, like, if all of the players at your table are aware that someone is a double agent, they're not going to trust them just because they're going to be smart players and they're not going to, like, divulge personal information out. So I think that one of the things that you can do is kind of have those conversations, like, one-on-one with your DM outside of the table. Are you...
Yes, I am.
You can just Google it.
No, I want to see what ChatGPT gives me. We'll eventually have an episode where we talk about sort of AI in terms of its role in D&D. But I just looked up sort of traditional tropes for BBEGs, just as there are so many. Just to hit a few on the list here. Dark Lord or Lady, powerful, malevolent figure, sometimes with magical or supernatural abilities. It's like the Sauron...
we have to come up with examples for all of these.
Yeah, well, like Sauron's a really great example. Oh Jesus, you've read fantasy stuff. You've read some fantasy stuff.
Some. I have no idea who the thing what you
Lord
just
of the Rings, big guy in the tower, giant evil eye.
We talked about this before. I do not like Lord of the Rings or The Hobbit.
Of Dark
Voldemort.
Yeah, Voldemort's pretty
Voldemort,
good too.
great example. That's something I've read. Fuck turfs. Side note. But yeah, like...
We'll hit Voldemort and Sauron and call it a day there. I think we're struggling with that. Tragic backstory. A lot of BBEGs have some sort of tragic past that, like, leads them down their path. I mean, my first and favorite villain of all time that I made, Kiloi, which is an anagram for Loki, that was his whole reason. Like, he did everything out of love for one particular character. Yeah. I mean, it was twisted because his brain, I mean, if you've listened to some of the previous episodes, we talk a lot about our first campaign, and I talk a lot about sort of the motivation for the villain, because there were a lot of events that happened previous to the campaign. And that's how I like to make my villains dynamic. I like to have things happen to them outside of the campaign leading into it, because it's very... very uncommon that a person or even a fantasy person is just going to wake up one day and go, I want to end the world, you know? Yeah. Like, even the Joker, who is chaotic evil for the sake of being it.
Depends on which comic you read, but there's an origin there.
Right, but there are a couple of different origin stories for the character becoming crazy. Like, there's always a cause for whatever, and oftentimes it's a tragic backstory. So, like, their family died, or they lost a loved one, or... they really tried to, like, accomplish this big goal, and it got thwarted by this one particular hero or a group of heroes. Or I think what's even fun, too, about the tragic backstory is you can flip it and have them, like, be the hero in their own story. So from their perspective, they've only ever been trying to do good, and then they were, like, thwarted by, in their mind, the bad guy, but to everybody else, like, the hero.
Yeah.
And so then it's even a little more, like, tragic in that sense that, like, from their perspective, everything they've been doing has been for the right thing. I mean, my initial thought was Thanos, but that's not...
I mean,
specifically kind of. MCU Thanos, I think fits that tragic backstory, like all the wrong things for the right reasons.
Because I think one of the most dynamic things you can do for a villain is not let them know that they're the villain. Like...
well, this is a perfect chance for you to talk about the book you've been reading.
Yeah, I said I was going to talk about this on the podcast. I've been rereading The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, or Snakes and Songbirds. I can't remember which order.
We both just watched it in theaters, not together, but we did watch it, and it was phenomenal movie.
So good, so fucking good. The book, fucking phenomenal.
Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes.
Songbirds and Snakes. Okay, but Coriolanus Snow, who's President Snow in the original trilogy, like light spoilers.
Suzanne Collins.
Suzanne Collins is
phenomenal
my everything.
Writer, man.
She's so fucking good. But so he's like the dictator. He's like the one in charge of Panem and is like continuing these Hunger Games and blah, blah, blah. And then this book basically follows him when he was like 18 years old. And it's not like the traditional like villain backstory where you expect like the tragic backstory where it's like he tried to do good and then something bad happened to him.
He loses his family.
Yeah. And like you see, he's in tragic circumstances for sure.
Psychotic,
but
man.
he continuously makes decisions. He is offered with, okay, here's a chance to do the right thing. Or something that's not the right thing, but is not evil. And he always chooses a secret third option, which is...
What was his best friend's name?
Sejanus, or a best friend.
Well, best friend in the movie, in the book.
Sejanus.
Sejanus?
Yeah, Sejanus Plinth.
Sejanus.
Sejanus.
Well, my thought, sort of reflecting on that too, talking about that, like having there being a hero that sort of mirrors your villain, is Sejanus is very much, in my mind, looking back at it, is supposed to be everything that Snow could have been.
Yeah.
So Snow and Sejanus are in the book and in the movie are faced with a lot of the same decisions, and the biggest difference between the two is that Sejanus will always go out of his way to make the decision that will benefit either the most people or that will try and sort of downfall or slight the games.
Yeah.
And Snow
continuously makes decisions to perpetrate and to continue and to like prize them, which is crazy because he's in love with Lucy Gray.
And he does it all out of love
in the games, and
he
like
does it all out of love for
like,
one character.
Yeah, he's fully in, like people who say that he was not in love with her, wrong. Is his love crazy? Absolutely. Is he toxic? Absolutely.
Yeah.
But without a shadow of a doubt, he loved her.
Yeah, love like a 1950s trophy wife love. Like love,
yeah,
like,
no, it was like I want to own you. No one else can look at you. Like it was a lot.
Living out some real hardcore fantasies with that one, man.
Yeah, I was last night when we were talking some D&D stuff. I was sitting there reading the book and just reading out lines, and they were.
But talking about tragic backstory, he's a great example. Coriolanus is a great example of like how that tragic backstory can be interesting, as opposed to just like they were a good person and then the worst thing happened to them and now they're bad. Like you can very much have a character that like
comes from tragic backstory without it justifying their actions.
And like the inkling of there being sort of this malicious intent or like under the water surface kind of like broiling evil was always there to begin with.
Oh yeah.
It's just the circumstance prevented or like sort of presented them with the opportunity to then fully like blossom, I guess, into that villain.
Yeah.
The next one on the list is ambition for power. So BBEGs that see
they always have
power,
that. Shout out Coriolanus Snow. That man was so ambitious for power.
Driven by a desire to achieve or maintain this power. But see, again, I think Coriolanus is such a well-written character that like his ambition for power isn't even like to have ultimate power. Like I want to control the world and I want to be immortal. It's
he's
like,
just like I have to move up in my station. I'm better than this.
He's out to prove a point. Like his thirst for power, his ambition to like win is to show the world that the Hunger Games, like it's one of the final things that's said in the movie, when oh my god,
that was me.
Viola Davis's character who
Dr. Gall,
she plays phenomenal. It has another conversation with Snow at the very end of the movie, and sort of towards the beginning, she goes, "What do you think the Hunger Games are for?" And he's like to instill fear, to like keep rule for this, for that, like I mean, whatever, a lot of reasons that normal people would think the games are for.
Yeah.
And then at the very end, when he's finally like been brought back to her, and she's like, "You're my protege, and you've passed all your tests. I'm gonna ask you again, what are the games for?" And he's like, to remind everybody that underneath all of this sheen and under all this shit, regardless of where you're from, we're all fucking animals, and the only way to keep us in check is to remind us that we're animals.
Yeah.
And so I think. Ultimately, his thirst for ambition is just to continue to show the world that in like higher stakes on a much more public platform.
And one of the things that I also love about the book and the movie, and like Coriolanus Snow as an example, is just it's showing the ideology of your villain, of being like, this is what I truly believe to my core. Is it a correct thing?
We're sure about the next one.
No.
Which is manipulator. BBGs are often master manipulators.
Yeah.
And will do just about anything to get their goals. I mean, that's Coriolanus to a T. Like, that's Snow to 110% T. Even when he's doing things for the right reason, if you consider, like, Lucy Gray preserving her life as a right reason or a just reason, it's always the wrong thing.
Yeah.
It's like, I'm going to send 65 bottles of water at these children and definitely rig the games to keep Lucy alive. I'm also going to tell her to poison several people.
Yeah, I'm also going to cheat.
Going to cheat in the games multiple different times.
Yeah.
Like, I'm going to manipulate one of my teammates to let their tribute die.
Manipulates Sejanus. He hates Sejanus, and he lets Sejanus think that he's his fucking best friend.
Yeah.
Because he's like, this is a good connection for me to have.
100%.
I was like, going into other manipulators in media, there's so many.
Yeah.
Like, literally just about every...
Keloy, my character
Keloy was
from
number
Campaign,
one.
A huge manipulator. I mean, everything he did was very much behind the scenes. He was never, like, a super big... like big, powerful, tough guy that has like a lot of superpowers and is like.
No, he was a slimy little fuck.
Ridiculous. He was a slimy little fuck. Like that's what he was known for. He would pop in combat encounters, and the second he got close to losing or they got close to winning, he would leave every time without a doubt. There was no like, I'm gonna fight till the bitter end because I hate you guys. It was no, you are so low on my fucking tier list of things I gotta do today. I'm not wasting my time or my life on you.
Yeah.
And I think that's what makes villains too very interesting is when the players are not the central part of their plan.
Oh yeah.
Because then it's even more. It's like wow, like they're.
It's like wow, fuck you, man.
Yeah, and it's like their machinations are so grand or their schemes are so big. It almost feels more organic to sort of stumble into that plot and then to force yourself to be the ones to sort of thwart him. Yeah. It's like you're not even. It's almost cooler that way because it's like you weren't even part of the plan, but here you are fucking it all up, saving the day.
And it's one of those things also of like, motherfucker, you committed these atrocities and I don't even matter. Yeah. Like, you burned down my house. You killed my whole family in front of me.
That wasn't even part of the
plan.
And
that's Tuesday for you?
Collateral,
You did that kind of on a whim? No.
Yeah. Minions and henchmen. So it's having a large group of followers. Minions or henchmen that like to do their bidding. It can range from like... stupid orcs, like, again, going back to Lord of the Rings, Sauron, he has an army of orcs born from dirt. They're all stupid. They're all evil. Then you have, like, in a superhero campaign, henchmen might look like skilled marksmen, like hired mercenaries that are intelligent and have weapons and have pack tactics.
This is also going to be Darth Vader or anyone in the Empire, really, and stormtroopers.
Stormtroopers, yeah. They don't even have to be theirs directly. They can just be like members of the force that sort of that person comes from.
Yeah.
Cult leader, kind of the same vein. So having that person being sort of worshipped in a religious way or a mystical way or even just out of fear. You know, like dragons are a great example of this. There are often cults around dragons in D&D because they're just so powerful, not because like they're mystical. I mean, some of them are, but a lot of the times it's like, here's this big bad dragon that's eaten like thousands of people. And there's this village at the bottom of the mountain that worships him and brings like a young virgin for tribute, every time. And that's where your party gets inserted, like going with them. And that's kind of a good example of cult leader. Doomsday plot. Their end goal is to end
the world.
Yep.
Next. We all know it. Okay, I'm reading this one.
Yeah.
Shapeshifter or disguiser. Some BBEGs have the ability to change their appearance, making it difficult for the heroes to identify and confront them. Fuck you for that one. That
slimy motherfuckers, man.
Shapeshifters are very fun villains to play with, especially if you want to play with the idea of making your characters lose their goddamn sanity.
The shapeshifter manipulator combo, fucking phenomenal, dude. Does wonders, truly.
Writing-wise, absolutely. As a player at the table, I wanted to reach across the table and throttle Robert sometimes, and I don't know if I wanted to hurt the character or hurt him as a person.
I mean, again, that's my villains are by far my best NPCs, and it's because I have a very rigid personality at times, and I can just get into that petty-ass mindset. Keloy was by far...
Every single villain that we've ever fought has been petty as shit.
Keloy by far was like the king of petty. Like,
yeah, absolutely.
He wouldn't confront people. He wouldn't give people the opportunity to fight him in a fair fight. He wouldn't show up. He kept trying to pay
people to do his work for him, and then people just went, nah.
Twice. I gave 2 people, like, huge stakes to be like, hey, go fuck over the party. And they were like, nah, but we kind of like these guys.
But they didn't even like the party, which is the funniest part to me.
Nope.
But yeah, shapeshifters are very fun to play with. Immortality or resurrection.
Liches.
Yeah, ability to cheat death.
Golden
through
Wart's
immortality.
a great example of that.
Yeah, another one there. I feel like villains and like immortality are always like going hand in hand.
They're pretty close to it. Palpatine's a great example of several of those.
It almost makes me want to see a good guy who's after and obsessed with mortality.
I mean, Paladins can get kind of close to that. But more so in, like, the reward of a task and less so, like, I'm actively seeking it out.
Yeah. Or like any vampires.
Yep, any vampire period,
Yeah.
and that's kind of like they've already achieved it. So
Symbolic motivation. The motives may be symbolic or representative of larger themes, such as chaos versus order, light versus dark. That's just kind of
Star Wars.
yeah, it's a general, like, it's the foil situation.
Mm-hmm.
Which I think is always very fun when you, like, are doing a villain.
Yeah.
Of creating someone who has either, like, similar circumstances or similar, like, ties or similar powers or opposite powers or, like, this, that, or the other in just a way that, like, kind of mirrors the situation that the party is in, or things kind of like that. Can be really fun to play with. And a lot of the time, at least in my experience and, like, noticing, those things will come out the more that you play.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's not something you have to sit down when you're creating a villain and be like, okay, this character is going to be foil in this, in this way. Sometimes I think it comes out more when you're just, like, going through. Because, like, looking back at our World Serpent campaign, I think one of the big, like, themes that emerged from that was, like, freedom, like, the concept of freedom,
Mm-hmm.
of, like, personal freedom, of, like, what does it mean to, like, own yourself and, like, be your own person.
Yeah.
It's, like, a really big theme that kind of tied
Mhm.
into every single one of the characters. And it was not something that, like,
Yeah, they just
we
kind of wanna, like,
intentionally
be
talked
free.
about or, like, did. It was just something that emerged. And so when you have a villain who is, like, all about control and controlling all of these things,
Mhm.
it creates a really nice foil to that. And that wasn't an intentional thing. Sometimes those things will just emerge, especially when you're making a villain who has to oppose the party and oppose your quote unquote good guys
Mhm.
in any way. And I mean, you can also take all this villain stuff and flip it if you're playing a party full of evil characters and you're making, like, a good guy to stop them.
Yeah.
It's also one of the, it's not like black and white, like good or bad.
100%. It's and it's a lot more fun to let their sort of motivations, their goals, and even their personalities sort of grow with the campaign, as opposed to having them being very hard set from the beginning. I mean, a lot of first time DMs and just a lot of DMs who are sort of writers at heart will want to, because I've done it a little bit, and I've had to sort of scale back in the moment, will want to write out their character, like their BBEG motivation, their personality, their backstory, like everything before the campaign starts. And that's fine, but also keep in mind that, like, the best NPCs and players, not even just like villains in general, are the ones that sort of grow with the story and with the narrative. So you can even have villains that aren't planned from the beginning that just sort of grow out of having other NPCs. Like, without giving a whole lot away, just because we're still in the middle of this campaign with the Capes and Crooks campaign, I don't necessarily have one particular person pegged as the BBEG. I'm kind of letting that happen organically based off the player's choices, based off what NPCs are paid attention to, which ones aren't, which ones the players find more interesting as opposed to other ones. And it's also very common for people to have, like, primary BBEGs and then, like, secondary and then tertiary and so on and so forth. Like, having your big guy that's behind the scenes or that's driving a lot of the plot behind, and then having sort of your, like, second in command, or they don't even have to have a relation. They can just be, like, the first big antagonist they have to get over.
Yeah.
And then having another one, and then having another one. Like, you don't have to just have one big villain that does all the fighting and the behind the scenes works. Like, give them a network, or just have other people, if you want to play in, like, a more organic and kind of, like, flowy world, have multiple that are all doing their own things. Just have some be, like, a little smarter than others, or have some be, like, a little more, like, waiting in the shadows, or maybe even, like, the final BBG of your campaign is, like, somebody that gets left behind by the party on accident at the, like, end of the first like, big fight with the initial antagonist. Like, it doesn't have to be something that you have planned from the very beginning.
Yeah.
Improv is very much, like, core to the game, and is like, it's super underrated when it comes to creating characters and motivations and story. Like, just feel it out. I mean, you are also kind of in your own way a player as a DM.
Yeah. And I think it's also something, and this isn't specific to our campaign, this is legitimately things I've seen elsewhere, which is, like, a lot of people always kind of want to gravitate towards like a surprise villain as well, or like a plot twist.
Yeah,
This
plot
person was
twists
the
are-
bad guy the whole time. Of like whether it's like an NPC that everyone really likes, or
Sorry.
whether it's
I
this
did, I
is
did
not
it. I did it
in
a little bit with
regards.
Mitchell. Like I'll give you that.
Oh, I wasn't even thinking about that.
I
Yeah.
had Mitchell. To be fair though, I had the thing with Mitchell wrote way in advance, like
Yeah.
way in advance. Looks like for the longest time I couldn't figure out where I wanted Keloy as a character to be. And it just didn't make any sense with the way that I had written the story for him to like be in the back rooms, or because I mean, there's no way that he would have been able to have sight on everything that was happening. So to me, it made the most sense for his sort of like personality, persona, his abilities to put him in like hibernation mode as an NPC that's mostly gonna be safe.
For anyone who did not see the episode we did about the World Serpent's Inn, Mitchell was the bartender in the inn, and Magnolia
always
was
there,
like,
was always
"Yeah,
talking to people."
this is my new best friend. I'm gonna tell him all of my personal information." And then it turned out it was the bad guy who was a shapeshifter the whole time.
But I think the sad thing about that even too was, and this kind of goes to like making a complex villain, is that Mitchell as a character was completely unaware who he really was.
Yeah.
So all of that information gathering and those questions and that probing and that advice, like that wasn't done with malicious intent. That was done as whoever the character thought they were. That's kind of where the fun of playing a shapeshifter gets in. I love the idea of like shapeshifters losing their identities and trying to figure out which one is their real personality. That happens in My Hero Academia with a character called Twice. He makes a bunch of copies of himself and then forgets which one is the real one and then kills them all. And then he's like, for the rest of his life, he's like, I don't know if I'm one of the copies or if I'm the original. Because they all have the ability to do the exact same thing, and it's not dependent on having the original body there. And that's kind of the way that I like to play him. But like even that, having the character or the villain sort of have this sort of tragic, flaw. Like his flaw was very much in his ability to be a shapeshifter. I mean, it was the thing that made him the most powerful. But it's ultimately what also gave like the players such a big leg up in the beginning and kept him from interacting with them because he was stuck.
Yeah.
Some other things, again, ChatGPT, just kind of looked up like tips of making villains in case there's anything I left out. Flaws and weaknesses, please make them fallible. They're a lot more fun if they are fallible.
I thought you were just gonna say, "Please make them foul."
No, make them fallible. Make them have some sort of weakness, whether it be physical, emotional, something tied to their past, a name, a person, an event, a place.
Emotional
PTSD.
weaknesses are really fun because you'll learn real fast. No matter how good aligned your party is, they will use that.
Oh yeah, when it comes to a BBEG, unless you're like playing in a party full of like paladins and clerics, no.
Things are gonna get so personal.
The second they figure out that there's a name or a phrase or a location or like an emotional sore point that they can lay on, they will every time.
It's bad.
The BBEG goes to like strike the heart of your ally, and immediately somebody across the table is like, "Your mother died in the fire, bitch."
Yeah, it's just balls to the wall.
Roll with disadvantage,
It's like everyone's trying to basically use like vicious mockery. None of them are bards. They're just saying foul shit.
Just happening. This one goes sort of almost without a given, without a given. This complex morality, like having them be a little kind of swishy. Like not every villain sees themselves as the villain or wholly evil.
Or what happens when a villain saves one of the party members?
Yeah, or like maybe the villain's sort of ulterior motives really work well with a mission that the players are on, and so that villain chooses to work with them, and it doesn't even have to be like a reluctant work with them. Maybe he wants to. Maybe they are super interested in actually getting to know the players for some random reason, and that can be kind of fun too. Not necessarily inserting them as a plant, but having your villains work closely with your players in as close to a mutual relationship as you can force.
Yeah.
Or that feels natural, because it's a way for both the villain and the players to sort of get to know one another in a slightly less negative context, which 100% changes the outlook.
Yeah.
It's like if I've spent time with these 4 people, maybe they saved my life, maybe I saved their lives. Maybe we're both working on something that like I know is ultimately sort of furthering an evil plan, but for them, it's like saving a small village with very important people or people they care about. Maybe then when it comes time for the villain to kill one of the players, they choose not to.
Yeah.
You know, like they spare them in this moment of like, you know what, you helped me, or I understand where you're coming from. We have a very similar background. That makes it a lot more interesting. That kind of ties into the next one that it has on here, which is personal connections to the protagonist. It doesn't have to be they killed their mother in a freak accident. It doesn't have to be he was there and watched
My
the
mother
whole
was
house
killed
burn
by
down.
Dalmatians, and that's why I want a puppy
Yeah,
coat.
it doesn't have to be that. It can truly just be like some plot lines that align. It can be a familial tie, a past friendship. They were at the same fucking, I don't know, they were on the same street corner when so and so got killed, and
My dad knew your dad.
Oh yeah, or like a great example. Again, My Hero. I've watched a lot of the anime and I've read a fair amount of the manga. Like, there's this big character who's kind of like the opposite of their BBEG called All Might, who's basically like Superman for this universe, and his existence is like the catalyst for two of the main protagonists to like become really, really, really great and super proficient heroes. And he is also the catalyst for causing two of the best villains, and ultimately, like the final villain. I won't give spoilers away for those that want to read or watch. Their motivation for being the way they are. Mm-hmm. So the two protagonists are very much like he's inspiring. He does it all. He always wins. He stands for everything that's great. He's the symbol of peace. I want to be that. And the villains on the other side of that fence see it as like he is everything that is wrong with this world. Like he is somebody that should not have that much power. He doesn't pay attention to the little guys. He causes more harm than good. And then that sort of kicks off both sides. And even that can be a personal connection. Because then when it comes time for those characters to meet, it's like there's this odd mutual understanding of like this character in the universe that you've created. Where it's like, and then it's kind of like a fun back and forth between the two characters. You can have arguments and like asides and this is what he stands for. No, he doesn't. Like, fuck him, you know?
I was saying, on the more, like, surface level of that, and we've kind of talked about it before, of, like, if there's a way that you can get your villain to have, like, a personal connection to every single one of the party members, that's always, like, super dope.
Yeah, good luck.
That's always, like, super sick. It's difficult.
It's very, very difficult to write that in. Depending on how many players you have, truly.
Yeah. I mean, if you're playing at a table full of, like with, like, 6 or 7 players... Nah, but if you're playing at a table full of like 3 people, 4 people, I think it's a lot more manageable. But that's also like another really fun one. And what you were talking about before of like the complex morality, I think makes for such interesting encounters because it also opens the door to options when dealing with a villain that are not just combat. Like, I mean, there's all the jokes of like, put the gun down, this isn't you. Like, obviously not to that level, but like having a conversation with being like, what are we doing here? What are you doing? And like opening the door for like non-traditional options, which I'm very pro non-traditional options in D&D because I think it's fun. I think it's fun to turn the tables and try new things. But I think that's one of those that kind of like sets that up.
It's going to be such an interesting reference because I don't know what the age range of our listeners are. I mean, I've already said Lord of the Rings, so I guess I'm a fucking old man anyways. Spider-Man 3 was the first one that came to mind. We were talking about that because... Spider-Man 3, the original Sam Raimi trilogy, fucking phenomenal. Jesus. Spider-Man 1 and 2 were great. 2 is one of the best Spider-Man movies of all time. You can fight me on that. Spider-Man 3 has 3 different villains. It has Sandman, it has Venom, and it has the Green Goblin.
Wild movie, side note.
Hobgoblin. Yeah, they try to do a lot. And in the very beginning, it looks like the primary villain of the movie is ultimately going to be... Hobgoblin in the form of Harry, who goes like nuts after his father gets killed
Cocoa Puffs
by Spider-Man. And then, of course, he finds out that Spider-Man is Peter, and then it kind of drives this really interesting wedge in their relationship. But he was the first one that came to mind in terms of like having that switch over time, like seeing who Peter is as Spider-Man, seeing that his motivations weren't like malicious and sort of really calling on that friendship. And in the very end, he ends up sacrificing himself to save Peter.
Yeah.
And that was kind of the first one that came to mind when I was thinking of like really complex villains that sort of start off incredibly dark and evil, but have that really twisted personal connection that then sort of turns into something very different that you don't really expect.
Yeah. I think stuff like that is always so much fun to explore. And it also makes, as a player at the table, that shit, if it's like a non-traditional option, it doesn't matter how many times you've seen it in a movie, it feels unique and fresh to you, and it feels like catered to your table and your party.
100%. I think, so this is something more from the stat block side of things and mechanically. Giving them unique abilities and memorable abilities is always really fun. It makes them a lot more like dynamic to play with in combat. It also makes them a lot more fun from the player's perspective to have to try and interact with mechanically because it's like, damn, that's bullshit, but that's so cool.
Yeah.
He's like, that's how his powers work. Or, oh, that's what he was spending all that money on. Or that's why he was robbing those shipments. Like he was building this big weapon. That's for me, it's one of the most fun things to do is stat blocks for villains, because like sky's the limit and you can make them as fucked up and crazy as you want, because it's like that's just going to add to how cool they are.
Yeah.
You
And
know?
it's one of those things where like as a player you're like, God fucking damn it.
That's so cool, but fuck, that sucks.
Or just being like if they've got an item and you're like, oh my God, I can't wait till we kill him and I could take
oh my
that.
God, the amount of times that he would pull a magical item out and use it in combat, and they would be like, I cannot wait to loot his body. Which didn't happen, by the way.
No, because he got eaten by a dragon.
He did. He got
We
eaten
couldn't.
by a dragon. But it doesn't even have to be anything particularly broken. I mean, it could also be something that happens in role play, like a unique ability. Maybe they can read players' minds. Maybe they can, like, they force people to always tell them the truth, or like distinctive skills. Maybe like they're incredibly good detectives, or they are really, really good at manipulating people. Like, and so what that looks like from a role play perspective is like having a plus 10 or 15 to charisma rolls, or like they can always take a 15 if they would roll anything lower, like stuff like that.
I'll say, jumping ahead on the little list you have pulled up here, I think that the unique ability thing ties really well into mystery and intrigue. Because I think also when you have these really unique abilities for these villains and stuff that your players like are like not introducing them being like, hey, this is what this guy can do, but you're just like watching an interaction or going through an interaction, and then suddenly this character who you've like, this NPC that you trust, the fucking bad guy just walks in and says, let me in the room, and they just fucking step aside.
Yep.
And you're like, what was that? Mystery and intrigue.
Yeah, having there be sort of like really behind the scenes. I mean, that's mystery and intrigue is really where like plot twist comes in, where it's like you're keeping secrets. Your BBEG is sort of manipulating things behind the scenes, and then it's kind of like when that final confrontation happens, pieces click.
Yeah.
We just had one of those things happen last session. One character was blissfully unaware that he was being watched because he didn't care to check ever, and then was confronted by his boss that turned out to be a really like shitty showdown for him.
Yeah.
But that's, again, like, signs were on the wall, 100%. Like, I threw out every possible red flag, and he trusted the character enough. He didn't expect the NPC to sort of figure that out when he did and how he did. And that was the twist, him being, like, at the very end of that conversation. It was very pleasant. Well, pleasant. It was very much like, you do this, we're great, we're squared away, I'm your boss, we're great friends. Also, I need you to drop the superhero identity. And his response, the player's response to the table was literally, he looked at me, he goes, what? And I said, you need to drop your superhero identity. And then I was like, it's hands or you drop and you work. And he was like, hands. And then, of course, it didn't go well for him. But,
no.
Anyways, that's kind of another example of sort of how that can happen. I think when it comes to stat block stuff and mechanically talking about unique abilities, it doesn't have to be like, oh my God, it doesn't have to be anything stupid like...
You made so many. You spent so long on stat blocks last night. You could come up with something.
Long on stat blocks last night. Well, so I'd made somebody that could very much work as a BBEG if she ever got turned the other direction. But a great example is I gave her a lot of very unique abilities that fit her character and fit what her powers are that aren't necessarily in the book that I'm using. Like one of them is, and this is going to be a fucking minor spoiler, but whatever, anything for the podcast.
Hey, this shit sucks. Do you have something you want to send in to make it better? Criticisms, topics you'd like to see discussed, or an advertisement you'd like to run? Maybe you even want to sponsor an episode.
If so, shoot us a message at mc460@evansville.edu or DM us on Instagram at Crescent Magazine. Or we'll never get better like these fucking guys. I gave her an ability to use multiple signature powers on one turn, but it has a significantly high physical toll on her. But that's something that's unique to her character and her character only, because she's one of the very few people in this universe that can have two powers at once and balances them incredibly well. That's kind of what propelled her to be like the number one hero in the city. Nobody else can do that. There's nothing mechanically in the book or in the universe that allows people to do that is solely unique to her. With it comes an immense physical toll, but it's only one that she can do because she has the ability to take that toll, and she spent years mastering how to use both of those powers at the same time.
And I think that also goes into the point of like when you're giving your villains these really cool and unique abilities, balance them in a way where it's like, yeah, they're super cool and they have their moments of like where they're like a little bit OP, but like at the same time are still a mortal being that your players can fight or have a chance of winning against in another scenario.
Yeah, 100%. I'm going to just pull up the improved initiative tracker. I've talked about it several times. I'm going to log in real quick and then kind of read you bits of that particular stat block here in a second, just so you guys can get an idea of what some of those unique abilities could look like. Another one of the things on this list is show, don't tell. So instead of just monologuing about the BBEG's power, have them like it's the actions and the impact on the world. Like, very much let their actions speak for them as much as their words do.
Yeah.
Especially if your BBG is like strong silent type.
Yeah. I think that goes for, and I'll talk for a little bit while Robert's logging in.
Hell yeah.
I think that's something that also like you can do that in combat, and you can also do that outside of combat. You can show weaknesses and you can show kind of like personality in ways that are not just like directly monologuing about, okay, this is where I'm from, this is who my parents were, this is how my parents died in this tragic thing of like, but you can show and like have your players do perception checks and be like, cool, you can tell that this person is like something about being in this location, he's off, like he's different, or there's something going, or she's like definitely struggling with something. Which allows for more of that like mystery and intrigue, and lets your players feel like they're putting together something. It makes all the pieces kind of click into place nicer when they eventually do get to figure out some of that information, if they get to figure it out, if they ask about it, or if they look for it. Because sometimes you also need to kind of make peace with the fact of like, not every asset or facet of your villain that you've spent so much time pouring your heart and soul into is gonna get paid attention to.
Yeah,
because sometimes people are just gonna kill the villain that you spent so much time on way earlier than you anticipated, and you're just gonna be like, well, shit, time to come up with a new one.
Well, shit, indeed, man, truly. I think that's something also to be aware of whenever you're making BBEGs, is that there is a strong chance that these characters that you've spent a lot of time on do not get the spotlight or die very early on, or people just don't give a fuck about them.
Yeah.
That happens. Have backups. Like, have backups. Have so many backups.
Everyone is expendable, even the big bad guy. There was an episode of Adventuring Party that Brendan Lee Mulligan was talking about this time, that he made this like really cool ranger villain, and he was like shooting arrows at the party.
That was exactly what I was thinking about.
On a cliff, and it looks like the arrows are like coming from the setting sun, and it's like so sick. And guess what? The party fucking caught him and killed him in the first session that he was introduced.
They trapped his ass, and he died.
Yeah, Brendan Lee Mulligan was like, well, okay.
That's fun. That's so cool.
Like, that's something that is going to happen to you.
100%.
It is going to happen to everyone. The villain is going to die sooner than you wanted them to. You're still going to have, like, things that you didn't want, that you wanted to explore, that you wanted to talk about, or you wanted to, like, get done with them, that are not going to get done.
I don't want to reveal a whole lot of things for her mechanically, so I'm going to go to the other stat block I made for another hero in the universe called Inferno. So he has one of the things I gave him. He's not a villain, but he very much, a lot of your special NPCs will be built out like stat block wise and unique ability wise, like BBEGs, if you care about them enough.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I gave him, he's a very large character in game. He's very broad shouldered. He's very like constitution is incredibly
built like a
high.
linebacker.
Yeah, and his powers are pyromancy. So he's a really, really, really adept fire user. He's the second ranked hero in the city behind Surge. So he's really good, which that is very much mirroring off of, for those that have seen my hero, the All Might and fucking, what's his name? Holy shit, Dakota's going to yell at me for not remembering his name. I'm going to move on.
This is going to the compilation of Robert forgetting names.
Robert forgetting names. Endeavor.
Be a new
Jesus
segment.
Christ, Endeavor. Inferno is very much based off Endeavor. So one of the things that I gave him is a legendary action, which legendary actions can happen at the end of any other
We've talked about those before. They're
turn.
such bullshit.
So the one that I gave Inferno, because he's very much like a legendary hero, is something called Raging Inferno. So in this particular setting, or in this particular system, there are what are called stamina dice. You can spend those stamina dice to do any number of things. You can use them to bring yourself back from 0 to however many stamina die you spend on it. It requires half. You get more of them as you level up. You can add them to different roles, like maintaining concentration. They can be used for any number of things. But for Inferno, a lot of his powers, like the sort of the hotter he gets, the more of a physical toll it takes on his body. So one of the legendary actions I gave him is that at the end of somebody's turn, he can sacrifice any number of stamina dice at the end of another creature's turn and roll them as damage dice during his next attack. And he has a lot of stamina dice. He's a very stamina-heavy character, and he has D8s.
What if we didn't do that?
So what this could look like mechanically then, let's say I make Inferno a villain, and in a fight he gets really mad. So the way that pyromancers are talked about, at least in the source book, is that they're very brutal, they're very blunt, they have a very fiery personality to sort of match their powers, and it's very much what Inferno is like. And so maybe he's like trying to one-shot a villain, or he just gets really pissed off and he has to sort of dig deep. At the end of a player's turn, he spends 6 stamina dice, and now the next time he hits anybody with an ability or like with a power, he's going to add 6 d8s to that like damage.
Jesus.
So that's what that could look like mechanically. Also, what that has looked like in terms of unique abilities is Kiloi, because he was an incredible. I mean, he was a god that whose primary power was shapeshifting. And he managed to hone that to such a degree that he could replicate any spell he saw once for every time he's seen it happen.
That shit was so annoying.
So, I was struggling to come up with, and this, trust me, for those of you that like to write or want to be a DM, this will happen. You will struggle to write stat blocks for unique characters, especially your BBEGs. And a lot of what I'm thinking of when I'm going through and I'm making these stat blocks is what abilities best fit the character, what mechanically makes sense. So, like, I had a laundry list, so you can ask Madison, she was there. I had
it was
fucking shopping list of abilities that I wanted to give Surge.
How many was it?
There were
total?
I had already added 7 or 8 different things to her stat block, mix of traits, powers, abilities, whatever. And then I had about 16, 17 additional things that I wanted to give her, and I narrowed it down.
It was
by
so
far.
much. I was rolling dice, basically narrowing down.
I went through and basically between Madison rolling dice to kind of give me an indicator of which ones I should get rid of, kind of like a draw, like a chance. It's D&D. I also reasoned with myself, as much as I would love her to have this ability, it makes 0 sense with what she's best at. Like, I would love to give her Cure Wounds so that she can fucking heal herself, but her powers, nowhere in there does she have the ability to heal herself or heal other people. So I didn't give her Cure Wounds. I didn't give her anything that's health-based. Same thing with Inferno. There were several abilities that I wanted to give Surge, like Savage Strikes or Reckless Attack, but it didn't really make sense for her character, so I gave it to Inferno instead, who's very much a, like, run into combat and do as much damage as possible, like finish the fight quick. And so that's kind of helpful whenever you're trying to come up with stat blocks for unique NPCs or villains. But there also, again, has to be some sort of a drawback. Like, the biggest drawback with Kiloi, I mean, being able to replicate any spell he saw was incredibly powerful, but that was all he had in his arsenal.
Yeah.
Like, what fucked him the most and what worked really well for the party is they had 2 ridiculously fucking broken martial characters that just squared up on him any chance that they got.
Yeah.
And he couldn't do a whole lot about it.
It was very much that thing of, like, in the D&D movie where the like, red wizard is, like, about to cast some spells, and then the owlbear just fucking pummels her to the ground.
Yeah,
is
she's
that, like,
getting bonked with the fucking ukulele.
Wizards can only do so much when you're just beating the shit out of them.
And so Kilo's weakness in that way was very much a martial weakness. Like, we had 2 very powerful magic users in the party for that particular encounter, but again, he's a shapeshifter. I mean, he could have changed into, I don't know, like a larger creature, but he had just done that at the combat encounter before.
Yeah.
He was very much like a 2-parter. He had like a phase 1 and a phase 2 type deal.
Yeah.
But like that is the single unique characteristic I gave him, and it made for a really fun fight. It was very bullshit because that's just who his character was.
I was so mad.
But there was a downfall to him, and that was the only thing he had. He had no unique spells of his own. So as long as the players didn't cast spells, he couldn't do anything.
Yeah, but when you've got 2 magic users who are...
When you cast Disintegrate twice, it makes for a fun character that can then cast Disintegrate twice.
No, I'll tell you the worst part was when he started being able to roll for wild magic surges. I was so pissed about that.
Yeah. Well, I was like, part of it too, and this is kind of going back to themes when you're talking about creating your villain, he was very much sort of the low end, or like the evil manifestation, if you will, of everything the campaign was about, which was like kind kind of referencing like a great movie, Anything Everywhere All at Once. Phenomenal movie, by the way. If you haven't seen it, I highly recommend it.
I love that we keep hyping up very, very
keep hyping
popular
very
works
popular
of media
movies.
on this podcast.
Go
like,
watch
people
it.
haven't.
It was phenomenal if you haven't. But that was very much the idea of the campaign, is that you could go anywhere, anytime, and meet any litany of different people. So I'm like, what kind of a villain then do I put in that kind of a setting where the players can literally be exposed to anything at any given time? And it was a character that embodied that to the worst extent.
Yeah.
Like having somebody that then is going to take advantage of that system and then sort of abuse it to the maximum.
Yeah.
Which is being manipulative, because he could bribe any number of people from across the multiverse. He had access to a ridiculous amount of wealth, and then relying on his powers as a shapeshifter, cataloging all these powerful individuals that he's ever met and making those his abilities as opposed to relying on his own.
Yeah.
Same thing with, and that's kind of what's difficult about making a BBEG for the superhero campaign, is there are a lot of goddamn themes right now.
Yeah.
Like, there are a lot of themes. It is very hard to find a central theme, and so I'm kind of leaning towards having multiple villains in my back pocket because, you know, the fuck else am I supposed to do?
It's also a thing where playing so many different types of characters in our superhero campaign. Like, everyone in World Serpents, while we didn't get along very well, there were some similarities between all of us that, like, kind of came to the forefront. But currently in the superhero campaign, it is a slew of truly wildly different people with very few things connecting them.
Yeah.
Other than being like, hey, let's be on a team together. So how do you balance that? How do you like find an in between for that?
Yeah, I think
Which is definitely a challenge that other DMs who are listening to this are gonna be facing.
Yeah, and I mean, I think kind of talking here at the tail end of the villain conversation, using villains, pro tip, using villains as a way to drive your party together and forcing them to work together, it's an incredibly powerful tool. I mean, it's
nothing bonds people like hate.
No, swear to God, that's how me and my fiance first started, like, became great friends in the beginning, was we mutually loved to fucking hate on people, and it was just, like, the greatest
Y'all still
thing.
do.
We still do all the time.
Don't act like that's in the past
One of our
tense.
favorite things to do is to make fun of people together. But anyways, yeah, like, truly nothing brings people together like hate.
Yeah,
Nothing.
it is insane. It is the quickest way to bond a party. I've seen it happen at the table. It happened in the first episode of the superhero campaign.
Y'all didn't even know who he was as a person.
I didn't have any issue.
He was a douchebag. The character was very much like a college bro douchebag, and everybody at the table was like, hit him,
immediately.
hit
But he
him.
opened his mouth and like said like some snide comment, which wasn't even like that bad compared to some stuff he said later. And everyone at the table immediately turned to me because my character was the one talking to him and just goes, hit him. Hit him right now. There's nobody around. There's no witnesses. Throw hands.
Or if you have one player who's not super engaged with your campaign, or who's having a hard time finding their motivation, sort of insert a sort of direct result of that villain's actions, or have that villain pull a lever behind the scenes that then sort of forces that player into action or gives them an appropriate reason to sort of become activated, I guess.
Yeah.
They're not just supposed to be plot devices, but by all means, if you're the one writing the campaign, use them as such.
Yeah. I think there's a balance. You can use things as a plot device without them just becoming plot devices, as long as you're balancing them with personality, and like their own motivations and life of their own. Like, you can have a really cool potted plant as your villain, and it's fine. It can be a plot device. It could be a potted plant, but like, give it personality.
Just a potted plant.
Yeah. So that was one of my favorite things. And this is maybe like a theater thing. Anytime there was like a main character in a show or something that like didn't really do much, but was the main character, it was like kind of the catalyst, we'd be like, cool. So they're the potted plant. Like, you could replace this character with a potted plant and the plot would be the same because they don't add anything to it. They just kind of go around and like things happen to them.
Yeah. I think maybe a couple more things and then we'll cut it off.
How do you make a hateable villain?
Well, I was gonna hit one more point on this list, and then we can do that. So one of the things on this list that I really appreciate that I think we've already talked a lot about is evolution and adaptation. So allowing your BBEG to evolve as a story adapts. We talked about that towards the beginning, but what I like about what it says here at the tail end is sort of learning from their failures, right? Like, have them. Yes, they have flaws. Yes, they have weaknesses if you've built them correctly, but also have them learn from their mistakes. Like, that's very much how Kiloi was the first couple of combat encounters he had. I mean, it was fairly one-sided, but even from that one-sided perspective, he was always watching and making perception checks to try and figure out how somebody's powers worked or the best way to disable a character, or paying attention to what damages somebody might be vulnerable to or resistant to, so that the next time they have a combat encounter or the next time he sends some goons, he sends the right goons, or he prepares the right spells or gets the right artifacts.
Like not sending plant creatures after a party with where multiple people have the blight spell.
Yeah, which that wasn't his choice, but it happened like that anyways. The other thing with that too is like having them sort of switch tactics. Like if you have a BBEG who's just like a big, broad, strong, dumb brute, like yes, it is fun to just have somebody rampage and fucking berserk against a camp, like against a party, but like that is gonna get so old so quick.
Yeah.
Switch it up. Give them a fun mechanical advantage, unique abilities. Also, feel free to change the terrain when they're around. Like I think a really cool way to is to have them prepare environments to fight your players in, and having that be what changes up their mechanics. Like I just came fresh off of Spider-Man 2, great game. Kraven is absolutely, I mean, anybody that's read Marvel Comics knows Kraven is like, he's a hunter, and he's like that guy. He hunts motherfuckers for sport, doesn't matter how big, strong, powerful superpowers they have. And his like penultimate challenge, the one hunt,
you getting chased.
Yeah, the one hunt that he loved the most was like Spider-Man with the symbiote, and it gets to the point where as you progress through the game, he sort of pokes and prods Peter into environments where he knows he's gonna have the advantage.
Yeah,
because he's a hunter. That's what he does. Like he's going to set up a sniper's nest. He's going to have a bell nearby that the symbiote is weak to. He's going to have things that overwhelm Peter's, like Spider-Man's spider sense, by having multiple small, like, sort of goons in the area that are all going to trigger that off at once, so that when he's in the back firing his rifle or taking his big shot, the player, in this case Spider-Man, will be overwhelmed.
Yeah. Have your villain make a little spend time DIY and Pinteresting a little.
We just had that happen like 2 sessions ago.
Yeah.
I fully had an idea that a particular character, once they had checked that my villain was at the top of this building, was going to come bolting at me.
Crazy choice.
She's a character that very much, I mean, we just recently found out that she has a very like intimate knowledge of each player in her mind. And so has a very good idea of how to counteract them. And the only person that really made sense in her mind that was going to try and come for her is the only character that was good aligned enough and angry enough of a person to do it was the Shadow, who has a pretty distinct weakness to light. So in preparation for this particular fight, she set up a shit ton of spotlights in the room so that when he showed up to try and confront her, motherfucker got hit with spotlights and almost died. I mean, she also almost died in that encounter.
Crazy encounter.
Yeah, she almost died in the first time I got to use her. Like, truly, she almost died immediately.
Everyone is expendable.
Everyone is expendable, traps, etc. Back to your question, how do you make a hateable villain? Oh, Jesus, I mean, I'm so good at it, right? I make hateable heroes, truly. I just make hateable NPCs in general.
Yeah. Share your expertise.
Share your expertise. I think having villains that are dynamic is a great way to start. So don't just make them evil to be evil. It is very easy to get, like, kind of roll your eyes and go, yeah, like it's the Saurons, it's the Voldemorts, it's like the guys that are just fucking dicks to be dicks. Like, they're not hateable so much as they are like a milestone. Like, we gotta go slay the big dragon at the top of the hill. I think my favorite way to make them sort of hateable is to make them relatable in some aspect. Like, ground them in some true-to-life, person-to-person characteristic that you know is going to, like, sort of hit with the party, because then it makes that internal conflict on their end trying to fight that character so much more difficult to do.
Yeah.
I think having your villains be smart is another really great way to make them hateable. It's perfectly good and well to throw sort of big, large boulders with a lot of hit points and very big attacks at people and just kind of have that be like the character. It's another thing to have like a villain that sits and waits outside of somebody's house and like surveils them or learns intimate details about their personal life. Trauma is definitely one of the best ways. Go after their loved ones, go after their family members, go after their friends, their like NPCs. Sabotage them in key moments. Like, have your villain be their number one hater. in some way or another.
That's your catchphrase.
Make them petty, make them a hater, make them smart. That is a perfect recipe to making a hateable villain. Because you're never gonna, if you're playing it smart, you're never gonna provide them with an opportunity to just outright beat your villain. You're never gonna give them the one up in a situation because they're never gonna have one. You're always gonna take shots at the things that they care about the most to try and break the character. Because I mean, that's
play dirty. Basically, that's
dirty.
what.
Throw some dirt in their eye.
Yeah.
100% sling mud. No holds bar. Just be a bitch. Be a straight bitch. I found another way to make them hateable is to just make them really powerful. Make them incredibly difficult to damage or to interact with. Give them a mechanic or a shield that makes them invulnerable to every kind of damage except for one. So then you can send them on.
That pisses people off at the table so fast.
Or when they roll a 25 to hit and you say that's a miss, that shit pisses people off like no other. Because it's are you... This is one of the best rolls I've had at this table.
I be throwing things,
and I don't hit them on a 25. I don't hit them. No, you don't hit them. But for that, I would say don't just give them an AC that's 35 or some shit. Yeah. Give them some mechanic that sort of makes them invulnerable to this, or makes players automatically miss when they swing with this type of weapon or this kind of spell. That sort of a deal. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think it's really it. I mean, just...
One of the things you said earlier about making them true to real life, I think that is the way that I've seen at the table, that people hate the quickest, just on, sure thing is, everyone knows an asshole in real life. Everyone knows. And, most of the time, you will have a base level of knowledge of the people you're playing with. Or maybe that's just our table because we're all very good friends. But most of the time you should.
The longer you play with people, the better idea you get of what kind of a villain's really going to get under their skin.
You know people's pet peeves. You know the type of people that certain people hate. One of the quickest ways at our table, just in general, because it pisses people off across the board, kind of misogynistic douchebag. Yep. Everyone's going to hate.
Everyone at that table immediately jumps on that shit.
Immediately is ready to throw hands.
But you know what's fun? What's fun about that? Kilo was never that stereotype.
No.
Never, not once.
No, he was just a creep.
Yeah, no, he was just a creep. He was just always one step ahead of the players. And I think that's what was the most frustrating thing about him, is that there was never a way for you all to catch up. Yeah. He was just too goddamn smart. He had too long to plan. He was just too good at what he did. Yeah. And it finally came down to a big confrontation.
So basically, find your friends' personal weak points.
No,
find them as a real person.
About your player. Well, for one, I'll give a couple examples. Dakota is an incredibly caring person. He's very empathetic, and he almost always fills some sort of role at the table, regardless of the character he's playing, to help others. Yeah. He's very much, I want to shelter these people. I want to give them mechanical advantages in combat. I want to help them succeed. I want to help them live. I'm going to forgo turns to make sure that they can do things that are fun in combat. Yeah. So having a villain that then is just going to harm players in really sort of evil and malicious ways has always been a really easy way to piss him off as a player at the table. Yeah. That's what Keloy in particular, I remember that final combat, he had a choice, and it was either to go after Keloy or revive one of the teammates. And he was I straight up told him, I was if you hit him, there's a good chance you could down him. But if you do that, there's also a really good chance that your teammate's going to die. Yeah. And he was very upset at what the decision he had to make. He was fuck it, I'm just going to go for the teammate. Yeah. You know what? Whatever. Teammate it is. And having players make those decisions can feel a little bad sometimes from the DM's perspective. As much as I enjoy making those villains, it does kind of hurt to... as an empathetic person myself, I don't like when my players get that upset at me, or when they get upset as players, but sometimes that's the best way to make a villain hateable. Make them upset in real life. Yeah. For Madison, it's having villains that directly thwart what her character does mechanically. Yeah. That shit she's very min-maxy. She's very I got a particular build and I can't wait to use it in combat and encounters and role play. So make a villain that just says no. Yeah. Make a villain that just says no. You got magic? I got better magic.
That shit pissed me off so much.
You're really great at performing? I can turn myself into any being at any time.
It was so fucking infuriating.
Mm-hmm. And then Jesus Christ, the other people at the table. I don't have to go down the whole list, but those are just two really great examples of have your villains be the antithesis to your real life players. Yeah.
Because, like, very quickly, patterns will emerge of the way that certain people play. And there's, like, no avoiding or escaping that. Because even if you're playing, like, characters that are so completely different, there's going to be
That's how I got
timelines.
the shadow to charge at the antagonist in a couple of counters ago, Prodigal, is that, like, I knew that the character he was playing and who he is in real life, he was going to get pissed off the second I downed, like, the children in the party.
Yeah.
You know? Like,
The fucking 18-year-old and the 20-year-old
Uh-huh.
get sniped, and he goes, no,
The second,
fuck that.
The second they went down, he was like, I'm going to make the decision for the next several rounds of combat to just sprint up this building and try and 1v1 her.
Yeah.
You know? Goad your players.
Go for the soft play dirty. That's
For the soft spots, baby.
The moral of this is be fucked up.
Be fucked up. I do want to ask you something really quick before we end, because I feel like I've talked a lot. What do you enjoy the most about interacting with villains at the table?
I really enjoy the moments outside of combat. I think that build, because I'm someone who, I'm very story driven. I'm very for the plot. I make dumb decisions as a character because I think that it would be good for the plot.
It makes for some fantastic role playing.
Like that's my shtick as much as I enjoy combat. So the moments that you get to interact with a villain when you are not fighting are always where like the meat lies for me. Because that's when you get to know the motivations, and that's when you create this like complex morality, because I don't think it's as fun to have a story where it's just like, okay, cool, I'm Harry Potter, that's Voldemort. There's no room for like a conversation about morality, or like maybe there is good in him, or like, is what we are doing right? There's no room for that. He's a Nazi. You kill him. Like he wants to eradicate races.
Yeah.
Versus a villain where you get to interact with and be like, okay, here's some like parallels, or like any time that you're dealing with like a villain who has like a personal connection to your character is always really interesting to me. Because it creates an uncomfortable feeling in me as a player of
like
being like
Simba and like the evil uncle, you know? Like,
yeah, it's like this like uncomfortable feeling too of like, I don't know what all you know about me, and that's scary, and that creates like a moment of like uncomfortableness, which I think is fun because I'm an actor and I like to live in that. That was the worst sentence I've ever said in my life. That made me want to bash my head on the wall.
To go back to another point we talked about earlier with themes, Prodigal is very much like the sort of antithesis to the first big theme that we've hit in the campaign, which is how do you balance a life between like a person and a hero.
Yeah.
And the one thing that she sort of hits at the most with the party at this point is that she knows everybody so intimately.
Yeah.
Like, what does a hero do when their identity has been sort of handed, like, I mean, yeah, just straight up handed or taken or stolen or surveilled by a villain? What do you do? Like, how far will you go to protect your loved ones? How paranoid will you become? How far will you fall morally, ethically?
Yeah.
You know, and that's already beginning to happen with some players. And
it's like a really scary thing. And it's kind of similar, or at least for my character, is similar in to the last campaign, because Keloy was also a character who knew Magnolia, the character that I played, very, very well. Like, and it was this thing of like this paranoia that starts to seep in of like, I don't know, because I'm playing both of these characters are people who don't fully know themselves. And to have a character that like foils that of like, I know so much information about you, whether or not it's correct is debatable.
And like in a weird fucked up way, there's almost like some sort of kinship between the two of those people then, because it's like, no, like this person's doing terrible things to me and is wrecking my life, but they're also one of the only people that like know everything about me.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the most interesting things is when you can find a way, and what I like to do is find a way as a player to also, like, because a villain needs good guys. A villain needs someone to stop them.
Yeah, it's the whole like, if without superheroes there wouldn't be supervillains.
Yes.
Like, it's the power that incites the power to then sort of fight against.
Yes. And I as a player, because I'm very thematic and everything, I always lean and gravitates towards, okay, what does my character need or want for this villain, from this villain? And I always try to like find something there because I think it makes for a kind of dynamic role play and just kind of like interesting motivations, and also can help counteract accidentally killing a villain too early, because sometimes you kill a villain too early and they were a really cool character and you don't want to like give that up yet because you were having fun with it. So you go on a whole new arc and you're like, we're bringing him back.
Yeah, we're retconning. We're just saying the last two sessions They didn't happen.
Yeah,
Between you and me, I'm unwriting the events of the last 48 hours. Gone. Didn't happen.
Yeah.
We're going back to when everything was happening. Thank you all for joining us in another episode of Table Talk, all about villains. Who the fuck knows what we'll talk about next time? Goodbye.
Bye.